Testing. Oh yeah, okay. I think this is finally working because sometimes this thing fluctuates and goes out and it just gets me kind of annoyed. Yeah, so anyways, let's have a chat today about gender stereotypes. This one's gonna be a little gritty. You probably heard this phrase, gender stereotypes, for long enough. It's this buzzword whose semantics have conjured up consistent images over the years, but it begs deeper analysis. For a good portion of my life, I was surrounded by this hysteria against stereotypes, and I always asked myself, okay, but what do you guys mean by gender stereotypes? Why are gender stereotypes portrayed in such an abject light? Pardon. Don't some stereotypes have some basis? And if you believe that the individual in the 21st century has the freedom to not live by those stereotypes because, we developed so much in terms of tech and equality and yada yada yada, then why this uppity attitude against stereotypes when there's no practical reason for them right now? It's almost like a superciliousness. It's almost like beating a dead horse. So uppity. One example, to clarify, is like when I was aiding for my English teacher during class. And English professor, because I was in college then, he started talking about gender stereotypes, going on about how modern day society expects women to be one way and men to be another. Women should be meek and pure and submissive. Men should be assertive and aggressive and hide his emotions, ooga booga. Versus now we are way over those stupid stereotypes. We have now superseded labels with some exceptions, like when 50% of women still aren't in STEM fields because, sexism or something. That was his contention. And I thought to myself, wow, okay, professor, no nuance whatsoever. Okay, if you say so. Now, I was thinking some things that I couldn't quite phrase back then because I needed to think about how to say it, but now that I kind of sat on it, I realized that I had two questions for him. Not two questions, but like I thought two things simultaneously. Number one, Mr. Teacher Man, society didn't come up with those expectations. You did. You crunched down society into a single label, but you didn't consider other factors like how the 50s were considered a resting period after both women and men slaved away at work in the Second World War. They just needed to win a war, goddammit, right? And people like my grandma, who was, by the way, a housewife in the 50s, were so much more than the gender stereotypes that, by the way, you came up with and you tried to box them into. So by that logic, despite the innumerable qualities of my grandma, to you, maybe she was worth nothing compared to the modern day women of today because, hell, she liked the traditional family unit and the structure worked out well for everyone. Now, you might say, well, that's all good and fine for her. She likes it, but what if she didn't like it? Women back then should have had a choice, right? Yada, yada, yada. But the truth is, we don't know what women wanted back then. There were certain norms in the 50s, and if there are norms, chances are this is what the women were brought up into, this is what they chose. So the likely answer, I can't vouch for it on an individual level, but the likely answer is that women probably wanted just what my grandmother wanted back then, most women, because it's how people best knew how to organize their lives and uphold society. And now that we got more tech and like that allows us to have more choices, never minding the all too real demands that accommodated the women entering the workforce, why do we need to erase history and speak on behalf of women a century ago for equality or something? Because you have to understand, people were different back then because life was different and they didn't know anything else. It was all a, kind of a developing process. Social justice be damned for a minute. And my second thought was, Mr. Teacher Man, what if I like being meek and agreeable and looking pretty for the man? Like, does that make me a sexist? I think all of us want to kind of attract our mates in the best way we can, even if it's kind of, stereotypical. What if I like being, I don't know, how do I say it? What if I just like being agreeable, even if it's more akin to the 50s model, okay? Am I less than the girl who isn't as agreeable in nature, let's just say? And by the way, I know plenty of girls who do fit that, model of agreeableness, and they're not necessarily traditional conservatives. It's like how James Damore said in his Google memo that women are more agreeable statistically than men. So doesn't that statement add up a little to, personal observation? Oh yeah, by the way, remember James Damore? Google fired him when he said that less women being in STEM careers isn't because, systems of oppression, but because they have different passions and more negative reactions towards workload stress. That women have a tendency to gravitate towards different professions that aren't necessarily STEM related because of that. He cited multiple sources and he even denied multiple times that gender stereotypes are a good thing. I know, I read the memo, you guys. And guess what? He still got fired. The guy was calling for diversity of intellect, which, by the way, was so lacking in Google, and they didn't listen to him. They didn't listen to anything he had to say at all. Google got butthurt because, let's just brush him off as a stereotype enabler, and that's that. And that was it. No nuance there whatsoever. Alright, then let's just play devil's advocate then. A guy said an opinion. Okay, so sexist. So what? Did women die because of what James Damore said? Did women lose their jobs because of it? It's like, no, he's the one who lost his job, not the women. Is firing someone for intellectual contrarianism gonna change anybody's minds? Like, is he gonna change his mind because you fired him? No, it's only gonna confirm his truth. And God knows that this is further proof that we women have never been more of a protected class than ever, especially in developed countries. So now here's where some of the naysayers will say, well, no, Serene, we're not saying you can't be that way. We're saying you can't be forced to be a certain way. I agree, but do you know what women actually want? I can assure you that the memo statistics that I quoted in Damore's memo do assert that only less than 50% of women actually want to go into STEM for a reason. So why push so hard for the 50% quota? Why push for the absolute, equality, for the equal amount of women and men in a certain field? What if most women prefer, and I say prefer, okay, to get into other fields of study outside of, any influence by diversity quotas and social justice PRs because they want to? That really does break the illusion now, doesn't it, of absolute equality, because preferences and how nature molds them doesn't really take political correctness into account. So you just have to make things up as you go. Also, the term woman empowerment is always going to shift as well. If we're going to talk about how, getting more women into STEM is like woman empowerment and stuff, it's always going to have a monopoly over this term, woman empowerment. It's always going to have a monopoly over a certain way that a modern woman is supposed to be, including, of course, today. So, essentially, no one's really breaking stereotypes. We're just conforming to different ones. One example being that I looked at a lot of women-directed and women-owned magazines in the mainstream media, and their ideas on how a woman should be are so similar to each other. Almost like they do have the monopoly when it comes to dictating what an actual woman is supposed to be like, look like, do like. It was true back then, it was true throughout all these eras, but it still holds true now. So coming back to the whole 1950s gender stereotypes debate, this is why it's not that simple to say that women were just oppressed by the patriarchy and gender stereotypes back then, because we don't really know what these women wanted. We don't know, and we don't know what they would have wanted otherwise. So of course they take the default route for stability reasons, like getting married, nestling, and having kids. And can I also add, it also really depends what country you're talking about as well back in the day, because I studied Russian history in school, and let me tell you, the serf women were expected to do it all. Not just to birth lots of kids to help till the land. It was inevitable, no birth control, but they were also expected to help out in the wheat fields, even while they were pregnant. And a few hours after the woman gives birth in some dirt spot in the wheat fields, she has to go back to work. What gives? Nobody's talking about that. Because in Russia it was like, gender roles? What gender roles? Bitch, please, we're just grinding our asses and dividing the labor in any way possible so that our Lord Ivan Ivanovich doesn't beat us and make us sell the family cow again. And something else that kind of struck me. Anyone remember watching Anne of Green Gables? Now, I'm not talking about the 2020 series Anne with an E. I'm talking about the 1985 version, 1985-86. I think, yeah, so, the classic one where they stuck most to the book. I love that series. Anne was an absolute role model there, and a darling without needing to resort to any stereotype breaking. Why did she when she was already amazing without needing to prove that she could be a boy to please the Cuthbert family? And that's kind of what the book was about too, as well, but that she didn't need to be a boy to be special and unique. Compare that to the modern day series where there was a segment where Anne was kind of like, "Dur her, I can plow the farm just like a boy." I'm sorry, but like the original Anne didn't want to prove herself by being a husky farm boy. Anne wanted to prove herself by just being herself. Um, Herself with all the other amazing qualities she got. Does that make sense? Because there's probably going to be this, this one naysayer who says, "Oh, so you're saying that women can't farm?" No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that the modern day series has just lost focus on what made the original Anne so unique. That's all. Whereas the modern day series, they just gave it this unnecessary feminist spin. Well, okay, let's play that game. Can't Anne have just been feminist on her own terms without twisting it with some modern day rhetoric? I'm just saying. Also, I remember at the beginning of the 1985 version where Anne is confronted by her very surly foster mother, Mrs. Hammond, who birthed like what, I don't know, 10 children. There was even a running gag about this where she births 3 sets of twins or something, and it really got to Anne. And as much as this Hammond character is shown in a negative light, it really gave me insight into life a century ago. She has lots of children, lots of stress, and you spend all day grinding just to feed the hungry mouths. The typical day in the life for most surly women like that. That's the reason they were surly, because they had such a stressful life. Oh, and the husband dies? What then? Then you have to just sell the house and divide the children off to the other relatives, and that was only the best case scenario. So let modern day feminists go tell old wives like Mrs. Hammond, actually, sweetie, you're oppressed and you're oppressing yourself by having children. Women like that, they'd look at you like you're crazy because stakes were different then. Stakes for survival and all that. That's why it's not easy to declare all of world history until 50 years ago woman oppression because, women didn't even think about what is fair and equal. They just thought about survival. Social justice be damned. Now, sure, there were plenty of women, I'm sure, who didn't want to live the Betty Crocker life, but societal progression, if we're going to take a look at the bigger picture, it's not defined by, consequently overthrowing one set of societal standards and everything that goes with it into and replacing it with a purely gynocentric perspective, because unfortunately this is this is the type of bias I tend to see. Like we don't include both the genders' perspectives. Progression comes with a slow, steady development, not at breakneck speed. Because with societal changes come consequences. And I think we've already lived that one out. For example, as a woman, you get thrown into a corporate world where you need to grind a considerable number of hours to survive in the current market. Even with a husband to help you pay off the debt, the mortgage, etc. And this is exactly what happened during women's liberation. The women entered the workforce, so the income doubled and the cost of living got higher. And I've heard it from my friends too, that consequently, because of the higher expenses, that they would have children, but they're financially insecure and everything's so expensive, and college degrees ain't everything these days, so that's why they kind of gotta put off the whole family life. So another trade-off of the trade-off of women's lib is that it just got less financially feasible to have children if you really wanted to. It's just not that easy anymore. Oh, those women in the 50s who were just reduced to breeding stills in the 50s. Well, really? Was it really all like that? Why do you think there was such a big baby boom back then? The answer might be simpler than you think. Because people have more children when they feel financially secure. So basically, it wasn't just societal expectations that you must have children. It's because you could, and people wanted to, and women decided, hey, what a convenience for an orderly, stable life. God, I'm reiterating myself, but you get the point. Did anyone ever think that maybe if people felt like they weren't scrabbling to pay the rent every day, like some of my friends do, they would feel more at the leisure to get with somebody and to pass off their genes? Now, of course, there are individual factors to take into consideration, like there are more women today in first world countries who are single and childless by choice because they can just focus on other things other than building the family unit. That's understandable, but I'm just stating one speculative example here as to, why things were back then versus how things are today and all the trade-offs and whatnot. So, bottom line, don't trust the society that doesn't have a couple old-timers sticking the ass traditionalists who know a thing or two about how society was upheld and how it works. And I say this as a non-traditionalist myself. So, shifting gears, I decided to just research the specifics as to why some people think gender stereotypes are like so very bad, or in how exactly they're so very prevalent today. So I typed into the Google search bar gender stereotypes. And the first article that came up was about the origin of gender roles, which they say all of it took place in the Victorian era. This article was written by a 16-year-old, by the way, but just so you know, I'm not going to be ageist today and I'll just form my own opinions in response. Okay, so I looked through the article and I didn't find any substantial citations on how these roles affect us on a grand scale, just that they are bad. Okay, is the cult of true womanhood outdated? Yes, because marriage is no longer a requisite for social stability. Does anyone today really still believe in forcing women back to the kitchen? No. So, what's all the fuss about? Well, apparently there's always a reason, and here's one I'll give you. Because apparently we still have gendered kids section. Like, for the toys and clothing, it's still sectioned according to gender. And that's problematic. I'm sorry, but what? How is this a big deal? Well, apparently it is. I believe just recently Governor Newsom signed a bill that banned the girls and boys sections for the toys and clothing and the like. At a young age, why would we want to prevent a young girl from getting into, wood shop or being a firefighter? Da-da-da-da-da, told da-da-da-da-da. All these items might be listed in the boys section. Okay, then who's stopping the girls from wanting to be a firefighter then? The toy section? No, no one. Unless you're a 9-year-old who easily sees labels by default and thinks, oh no, since fire trucks are for, in the boys section, well, that means I'll never be a firefighter girl. But then, have you considered maybe all 9-year-olds are twats because they're not developed enough to see nuance in things? I know. When I was 9, I was like the biggest twat I knew of. So, no one is stopping a woman from being a firefighter just because she saw fire trucks in the boys section. Does your daughter like fire trucks? Fine, just take her to the boys section and say, hey yo, welcome to the boys club. It's unique to find a girl who likes fighting fires. That's it, there you go. That's literally all the encouragement a girl needs. I shouldn't even have to add that boys gravitate more on average towards elements of danger. I think there's a reason for the saying, boys go to Jupiter because they're stupider or something. Maybe that's why you see more male firefighters, because they like more of the risk-taking, which is why we associate firefighters more with men, and, so the ball gets rolling. So, ladies, don't join the fire squad for social justice reasons. Join it because you're strong enough to haul my stupid dumbass out the burning building after I, burn the curtains with some, scented oil candles or something. Yeah. Now, in lieu of that, if there's one country that's done the whole degendering for a long time, let's just say before Cali, that would be Sweden, and just in general the Scandinavian countries, I believe. Because as early as in preschool, in Sweden for instance, they just eliminate all of the pink and blue in the classroom, and they give the boys baby dolls and the girls trucks or something. You know what they were going for. Start them out real young so that we can diversify the workplace from the get-go. Well, that's not what happened. Gender-equal countries produced fewer women interested in STEM. Reason being, individual differences in personality, not excluding the fact that women are just statistically and generally more interested in people and males and things. Just to give the the simple explanation. Compared to developing countries like this one article says here, in the STEM paradox, why are Muslim majority countries producing so many female engineers? So, question time for the media overlords. If color preferences are a social construct, then why try so hard to ban preferences for pink and blue altogether? Don't you trust that people will gravitate towards the colors they actually like? Are you afraid that maybe girls on average lean more towards Barbie dolls, and boys towards trucks because they just simply like it. I mean, I don't know. I don't know. Girls and boys share more in common biologically than differently. Okay, if we're gonna talk about differences, we have so much in common. More in common than differences. But if we do have the differences, if we're gonna focus on the differences, then consider that those differences would be very significant, don't you think? And I'm not talking about subjective things like intelligence, like, oh, who's more intelligent. I'm talking about preferences here. Preferences that, root in something as simple as maybe toys, and that don't mean anything. They don't mean anything in terms of intelligence or anything. Again, I'm not vouching for all children, but I was a very girly girl. And if you would give me a boy truck for Christmas or anything that looked boy related, I would actually be pretty insulted. And now that there's a trend, besides which, among parents to trans their kid based on color preferences, like, boy likes girly toys, oh, he must be a girl, that type of stuff. Now that there's this type of trend, now we should contend that these are stereotypes coming full circle, don't you think? Which draws me into my next conclusion. If you're gonna ban all gender stereotypes, well, however much you may try, why don't you just, why just stop at what people wear? Why don't we start by denying who people are biologically as well? We already see this in action, that now it's considered discriminatory in, media outlets, high status circles to say that only women have the ability to give birth. Congrats, we're now officially called birthing people because now it's stereotypical and therefore discriminatory to assume that only women can give birth. Like, how demeaning can you get to completely cut off my abilities from my own biological makeup? Okay, buddy, okay. Like I said, stereotypes coming full circle here. Like, did the people in Google ask whether I thought pink was stereotypical? No. Well, I mean, yeah, it is stereotypical, but I don't think it's stereotypical in a bad way. It's just kind of an observational thing that girls gravitate towards pink. So what? Who cares? But Google didn't care. They just assumed that I think that pink is bad, which is not true. Like, in addition, did they ask me to be referred to as a birthing person? No. And I'm going to assume that a lot of women, most in this, in the country or whatever, they also don't assume that they also didn't ask for it, So, my conclusion: stop trying to break out of stereotypes, because even women themselves don't want to. Which is, when are they gonna want to? Never. I'm assured of that, because even in 2022, I'll give you one example. Once when I was kind of exploring Bumble, I saw that a lot of the women's bios had the following written: feed me food, take me out on a date, treat me nicely, give me flowers. Yeah, I'm located in the Bay Area, by the way, the hotspot of progressivism. You think those girls are necessarily interested in breaking stereotypes, gender stereotypes, getting stalked on feminist theory? Nah. Well, maybe on a surface level, but they'll let the guy pay the entire bill on their next date. So it's kind of a Schrodinger's feminism. It's cool to be empowering until it's convenient to be, walked over by the thirsting simps or, whoever is out there to give her money to the OnlyFans or, pay for her date or whatever. So if we're going to play the game, of course, I would say that, which, I'm not playing the game. I strive to judge people by who they are and not how stereotypical or unstereotypical they are. So, just to sum up my main points, in a nutshell. Number 1, no group has the monopoly on what it means to break stereotypes and ergo what it means to be an empowered woman. Number 2, the term empowered woman is a vague statement that can mean pretty much anything and is prone to power grab by the predominating gynocentric think tank. Number 3, trying to tick off a checklist of how many stereotypes you break is only going to shroud you in more labels and stereotypes and doesn't leave consideration for individualism, which I think is lacking in our rather label-obsessed society, which is ironic for a system that claims to want to break stereotypes. I mean, think about it. You can say, I'm a woman and proud. Yeah. I'm gay and I'm proud. Yeah. I'm a gay woman and I'm proud. Oh, look, more brownie points for me. See what I mean? Number 4. Every stereotype has an element of truth, and we should trust that individuals are smart enough to pick out the good ones from the outdated ones instead of beating them over the head with critical theory, which seeks to radically reform everything without careful consideration. Um, Final point. Don't even try breaking stereotypes because eventually we're just gonna come full circle anyway. It's almost like there's this hyper focus on who's conforming to stereotypes and, who's not. Almost like all of this is just so superficial. Don't get me started on the latest non binary trend, how hard people are just trying to look non binary. Because, never mind that crafting your appearance to look a certain way does not define your gender, and sir, I'm assured at this point that people just tend to mix these two up, looks and personality with gender. Alright, that's about it for my warbling. Stay tuned for the next episode where I talk about the implications of men crying, in my opinion. Don't want to come off as a mansplainer, or maybe I will, I don't care. But I promise it's going to be different from the usual toxic masculinity angle. Or is that a topic we've already covered extensively in the late 2020s? God knows.